The legal landscape of South Carolina has been thrown into absolute chaos following a stunning, unanimous decision by the state Supreme Court that has completely upended one of the most high-profile double murder convictions in recent memory. In an unprecedented legal twist, the highest court ruled that the initial trial of disgraced former power attorney Alex Murdaugh was fundamentally compromised by egregious instances of jury tampering, rendering the previous guilty verdict null and void. For a man who has been widely decried as a master manipulator, a thief, and a thoroughly despicable figure in the public eye, this decision represents a monumental, if highly controversial victory. The original conviction, which leaned heavily on critical digital evidence, specifically a time-stamped Snapchat video that placed his voice directly at the hunting lodge kennels moments before the slayings occurred, has now been entirely erased from a technical standpoint. Legal observers are left reeling, noting that while the defendant aggressively pursued this appeal to escape a lifetime behind bars, his victory has triggered an ominous counter-strategy from the state. In a dramatic escalation of stakes, the South Carolina Attorney General responded to the reversal by formally announcing that the prosecution is actively considering the implementation of the death penalty for the upcoming retrial, raising the tactical warfare between the defense and the state to its absolute zenith. This impending courtroom battle is poised to be an incredibly volatile spectacle, with veteran criminal defense analysts predicting an erratic, high-stakes game of strategy regarding whether the defendant will choose to take the witness stand a second time. During his initial trial, his appearance on the stand was widely regarded by media commentators as an absolute disaster, characterized by intense physical breakdowns, visible weeping, and what critics described as highly performative, manufactured displays of grief. Many seasoned trial attorneys argue that it would be utter madness for him to expose himself to cross-examination again, suggesting that the fiery gates of the underworld would freeze over before a competent defense team would willingly allow a client to repeat such a catastrophic performance. However, those familiar with the psychological makeup of the defendant suggest that his deeply entrenched narcissism and overinflated ego will ultimately dictate his actions, entirely overriding the cautious advice of his legal counsel. Historically, his career as a prominent litigator was built on an unshakable belief that he could look 12 ordinary citizens in the eye and construct a narrative compelling enough to escape accountability. Consequently, there is a widespread expectation among courtroom insiders that as soon as the prosecution concludes its case in the new trial, the defense will immediately call the accused to the stand, setting the stage for a theatrical, ego-driven encore performance that will draw international scrutiny. Compounding the sheer absurdity of this unfolding legal saga is the revelation that the defendant has launched a massive civil lawsuit against the elected clerk of court, Becky Hill, the very official whose controversial actions inadvertently handed him his administrative lifeline. To the casual observer, the decision to sue the individual who essentially paved the way for a vacated sentence seems counterintuitive, if not entirely ungrateful, leading many to wonder why he isn't sending her a basket of fruit rather than a civil summons. Investigative journalists tracking the progression of the case have revealed that the underlying motivation is purely financial and calculated. The lawsuit seeks a staggering $600,000 in monetary damages to directly reimburse the defendant for the exorbitant legal and expert witness fees expended during the first trial. The defense asserts that because the clerk's alleged misconduct and inappropriate commentary to the jurors directly caused the first trial to be declared unfair, her actions forced the defense to incur massive redundant expenses for a process that must now be completely repeated. While critics and media pundits have swiftly condemned the civil filing as a textbook example of a frivolous, vindictive lawsuit designed to harass a state actor, constitutional scholars point out that the claim rests on a very specific, legitimate statutory framework. Under Section 1983 of the United States Constitution, every individual is guaranteed a fundamental right to a fair trial by an impartial panel of their peers, completely insulated from corrupting outside influences or biased directives from authority figures. Because the clerk of court is an elected official acting under the color of state law, any deliberate attempt on her part to influence the mindset of the jury panel constitutes a direct violation of civil rights, thereby exposing both her office and herself to severe liability. This legal strategy aims to hold a rogue state actor accountable for degrading the integrity of the judicial process, while simultaneously utilizing Section 1988 of the Constitution to demand that the state cover all subsequent legal fees associated with bringing the civil action forward. As the public prepares for the renewal of this grim legal theater, the memory of the initial investigation continues to haunt the collective consciousness, particularly regarding the jarring behavioral shifts exhibited by the accused in the immediate aftermath of the tragedy. Crime scene analysts and investigators have frequently pointed to body camera footage captured on the night of the murders, which shows the defendant sobbing hysterically to arriving law enforcement officers, only to instantly deactivate the emotional display a moment later to casually check his cellular device. This chilling capacity to compartmentalize emotion has fueled intense speculation regarding his true psychological profile, with many viewing the rapid transition from a grieving patriarch to a detached, calculating strategist as a defining characteristic of his deceptive patterns. While the civil courts prepare to debate the monetary nuances of jury contamination and state accountability, the overarching criminal case is rapidly moving toward a dark, definitive showdown where the ultimate penalty is now firmly on the table. The legal framework supporting the defense's aggressive civil strategy centers on the precise assertion that the integrity of the judicial system was intentionally compromised, creating a direct chain of financial liability. From the perspective of the accused, the unauthorized intervention of the court clerk did not merely result in a technical error, it actively derailed what the defense claims could have been an outright acquittal or, at the very least, a deadlocked jury. By presenting testimonies from jurors who admitted their final verdicts were colored by external commentary, the defense argues that a valid, uncorrupted deliberation process was stolen from them, forcing the expenditure of hundreds of thousands of dollars on expert witnesses and trial logistics that are now entirely worthless. This calculation forms the bedrock of their demand for full restitution, positioning the lawsuit not as a vindictive distraction, but as a mandatory legal pushback against a state actor who abused her position of public trust. While the civil battle over financial damages intensifies in the background, the broader community remains deeply unsettled by the horrific realities documented in the medical examiner's forensic reports, which completely strip away the theatricality of the courtroom. The autopsies performed on the two victims paint a terrifying picture of clinical, close-range violence that leaves absolutely no room for claims of accidental or spontaneous conflict. Forensic data indicates that the matriarch of the family sustained 5 distinct gunshot wounds, with multiple entries displaying clear evidence of gunpowder stippling, a distinct physical marking that proves the muzzle of the weapon was fired from an intermediate distance of mere inches to a few feet away. The trajectory of the projectile suggests a brutal progression. After being struck initially in the abdomen and thigh, she likely collapsed to her knees, placing her in a position of complete vulnerability before the final fatal round was delivered directly into the back of her skull. This highly specific execution-style execution speaks to a terrifying level of deliberate intent, while secondary defensive wounds on her wrist indicate a frantic, futile attempt to shield herself from the incoming fire. The forensic narrative surrounding the younger victim is equally harrowing, revealing that the perpetrator utilized a completely different weapon to execute the secondary assault, a tactical shift that implies careful preparation and a chilling lack of hesitation. The son was targeted with a high-powered shotgun, suffering 2 devastating blasts that caused catastrophic internal and structural destruction. The initial wound tore through his chest cavity, while the second definitive shot struck his neck at close range, directing the full explosive force of the ammunition upward and resulting in immediate lethality. The sheer ferocity of the physical trauma left behind at the crime scene, with forensic evidence scattered across the upper structures of the facility, underscores a level of violence that shocked even veteran homicide investigators. This stark, scientific reality stands in sharp contrast to the defense's attempts to reframe the narrative around administrative errors, forcing the public to confront the absolute brutality of the crimes. For those who spent years working within the inner circle of the prominent family, the sudden collapse of the household into a scene of unprecedented violence was a jarring departure from what appeared to be a standard, supportive domestic dynamic. Close associates and household staff recall that prior to the tragedy, the family unit presented an exterior of absolute normalcy, frequently traveling together, organizing hunting trips, and demonstrating mutual support during public events. Although the family was under mounting pressure due to a series of escalating civil lawsuits and looming financial disclosures, There were no overt signs of domestic discord or impending danger. In the immediate aftermath of the killings, the patriarch's behavior shifted into an intense state of apparent devastation, alternating between periods of inconsolable weeping and moments of eerie, detached calm as he accepted the sympathy and resources of a grieving community. This cyclical pattern of behavior has drawn intense scrutiny from psychoanalysts who argue that the emotional displays were part of a deeply ingrained mechanism of manipulation designed to exploit the empathy of everyone around him. Throughout his career, the accused had demonstrated a profound ability to extract resources, trust, and sympathy from vulnerable targets, seamlessly pivoting from financial exploitation to emotional performance when cornered. Experts point out that his actions following the murders, allowing friends, neighbors, and staff to comfort him, prepare meals, and offer condolences, fit perfectly into a lifelong profile of a detached operator who viewed those around him purely as marks to be manipulated. By maintaining a facade of profound grief while actively managing the fallout of his actions, he successfully utilized the collective shock of the community to shield himself from immediate suspicion, transforming a horrific domestic tragedy into a personal shield against accountability. The psychological profiling of the accused paints a chilling picture of an individual entirely devoid of standard human empathy, a characteristic that allows for the seamless maintenance of a normal exterior while orchestrating acts of profound destruction. Forensic psychologists observe that within this specific operational framework, immediate family members are rarely viewed as objects of genuine affection. Instead, they function as social assets, serving to project an image of stability and prestige to the outside world. This structural facade was vital for maintaining the trust of wealthy clients, legal associates, and financial institutions, effectively acting as a defensive shield while a massive web of fiscal fraud was being executed behind the scenes. When the stability of that professional and social veneer was threatened by imminent legal exposures, the utility of the assets shifted, leading to a calculated tactical elimination designed to generate a massive diversion and elicit overwhelming public sympathy. Veteran homicide investigators who have analyzed hundreds of complex domestic capital cases note that the strategic planning behind such offenses often involves creating an alternative narrative long before the crime itself is executed. In this instance, the digital footprint and communication logs from the night of the tragedy indicate a deliberate attempt to establish a solid alibi, with the perpetrator actively making outbound calls and sending messages to family members while simultaneously traveling to the crime scene. This overlapping timeline was intentionally constructed to mislead investigators, relying on the assumption that a frantic, grieving father and husband would never be suspected of systematically executing his own heirs. The subsequent discovery of a secondary witness, specifically the audio recording captured on a cellular device at the kennels, completely dismantled this fabricated timeline, revealing that the accused was present at the exact location and time the violence occurred, despite his repeated assertions to the contrary. As the state gears up for the complex process of a complete retrial, the legal teams are locked in a fierce debate over the viability of a third-party guilt defense, a classic courtroom tactic colloquially known as pointing to an unknown adversary. Defense strategists argue that in a region heavily impacted by illicit narcotics trafficking and unchecked regional corruption, numerous external actors possess both the motive and the capability to target a prominent legal family. By introducing alternative theories involving vengeful criminal networks or disgruntled associates tied to the family's extensive financial dealings, the defense aims to introduce a sustainable element of reasonable doubt into the minds of the new jury panel. Under constitutional mandates, the defense is under no obligation to definitively solve the crime or prove the identity of an alternative suspect. Their sole structural objective is to demonstrate that the state's narrative is not the only plausible explanation for the tragedy. The prosecution is prepared to aggressively counter this strategy by highlighting the defendant's established history of staging elaborate, deceptive scenarios to divert attention from his own actions. Legal experts point to a highly bizarre incident that occurred shortly after the initial murders, in which the accused allegedly organized a fraudulent roadside assault against himself, resulting in a superficial head injury that was presented as an attempt on his life by the true killers. While the defense attempted to frame this event as the work of a dangerous, lingering adversary, subsequent investigations quickly revealed that the entire scenario had been meticulously arranged by the defendant, using a close associate as a compliance actor. This pattern of behavior provides the state with a powerful counter-argument, allowing prosecutors to argue that any claims of an external perpetrator are simply a continuation of the same deceptive tactics utilized from the very beginning of the investigation. The decision by the South Carolina Attorney General to pursue the highest penalty available under the law has significantly raised the stakes of the upcoming trial, transforming it into a definitive test of the state's judicial resolve. To successfully secure a capital conviction, the prosecution must prove beyond a reasonable doubt the existence of specific statutory aggravating circumstances, such as the simultaneous commission of multiple homicides or the element of lying in wait. The state's narrative will argue that the victims were intentionally lured to the isolated hunting property under false pretenses, utilizing their trust to place them in a defenseless position where they could be executed without interference. This calculated exploitation of familial trust forms the core of the state's aggravation case, setting up a brutal legal confrontation where the defense will fight to dismantle the structural validity of the prosecution's timeline. The structural framework of the prosecution's capital strategy rests heavily on demonstrating that the double homicide was not an isolated outburst of violence, but rather the capstone of an intricate systemic effort to suppress the imminent collapse of a multi-million-dollar financial empire. Legal analysts note that at the time of the offenses, the accused was facing a catastrophic convergence of professional ruin, with an upcoming civil hearing regarding a fatal boating accident poised to force an absolute transparency of his illicit banking activities, trust fund depletions, and decades of corporate theft. By establishing that the sudden, tragic loss of his immediate family served to instantly halt these adversarial legal proceedings while generating an immediate wave of community deference and professional leniency, the state possesses a powerful baseline for pecuniary motive. This narrative positions the actions of the defendant as a calculated trade-off where human life was weighed against the preservation of social stature and the concealment of widespread financial malfeasance. As the regional authorities finalize their preparations for the upcoming judicial proceeding, internal polling and legal experts suggest that the state's determination to advance with a capital trial represents a calculated effort to restore absolute public confidence in a judicial system that has been deeply tarnished by allegations of institutional favoritism and elite protectionism. For generations, the legal dynasty headed by the defendant's family exercised unprecedented authority over the local circuit, effectively controlling prosecutorial decisions and law enforcement priorities across multiple counties. The upcoming trial is therefore viewed by many as a critical institutional turning point, wherein the state must prove that the rule of law operates independently of historical privilege and family prestige. This socio-political backdrop ensures that the prosecution will face immense structural pressure to secure a definitive verdict, utilizing every forensic resource available to ensure that the procedural errors of the first trial do not compromise the finality of the outcome. To counter the defense's anticipated efforts to minimize the scientific certainty of the original findings, the prosecution is prepared to deploy an advanced presentation of digital and ballistics forensics that reconstructs the final moments of the victims with millisecond precision. By fusing cellular location data, automotive telemetry from the defendant's vehicle, and the acoustic profiles embedded in the recovered kennel video, the state aims to construct an inescapable timeline that completely eliminates the possibility of external intervention. This technological framework is designed to show that the interval between the defendant's recorded presence at the scene and the absolute cessation of the victim's cellular activity is far too narrow to accommodate an anonymous third-party assailant. This precise coordination of physical and digital evidence will serve as the core structural barrier against the defense's attempts to generate reasonable doubt through speculative alternative theories. Concurrently, the defense team is expected to focus its initial procedural maneuvers on securing a comprehensive change of venue, arguing that the intense, relentless media saturation surrounding the case has effectively poisoned the local jury pool beyond any possibility of redemption. They assert that within the immediate geographic region, the pervasive public narrative, coupled with the emotional fallout of the initial trial, makes the selection of 12 completely impartial peers a structural impossibility. Should the court deny this request, the process of jury selection will become an incredibly protracted and highly scrutinized phase of the litigation, with both sides utilizing aggressive vetting techniques to identify hidden biases or ideological predispositions regarding capital punishment. This foundational skirmish will set the tone for the entire trial, determining the demographic and psychological landscape upon which this complex legal drama will ultimately be decided. Ultimately, this unprecedented case stands as a stark testament to the absolute fragility of institutional power when confronted with the destabilizing forces of unchecked personal greed and systemic deception. What began as an investigation into a horrific local tragedy has evolved into a comprehensive examination of structural corruption, forensic resilience, and the outer limits of criminal strategy. As the state moves methodically toward the commencement of opening statements, the international community remains captivated by the unfolding spectacle, waiting to see whether the modern mechanisms of advanced forensic prosecution will successfully navigate the complex maze of appellate reversals, civil countersuits, and entrenched regional history to deliver a final, unappealable resolution.